My name's Rianna Oliverez. I'm 32 and I'm going to be talking about some of the things that I've survived. Growing up, I kind of felt like Matilda. I was very intelligent from a young age. My parents, they're not unintelligent, but they're not encouraging of different abilities and things like that. So it was kind of pushed down because I was very wanting to learn and things like that, and I wasn't encouraged. So it was kind of just like I was the older sibling, but I was almost like a third parent. And I know that's quite common in some families, but my experience, I think, was very toxic in the way it happened and stuff. And it just wasn't a calm upbringing. And my siblings would all say the same. I have 4 siblings and a half sibling. They're all relatively doing okay in comparison. I know that sounds silly, but they have normal-ish lives, whereas I have a lot of mental health. My mum, she was emotionally abusive. She never laid a hand, but she was very, and still is very, narcissistic. She lacks any kind of empathy for anything that isn't to do with her. And that's the same for both of my parents. Though my biological father, he was diagnosed schizophrenic and narcissistic personality disorder in his childhood. It was a combination of 2 very strong people that shouldn't have been parents that became parents, and just shouldn't have been. It was just pure chaos. I was writing a lot, but I felt like such a silenced voice anyway that just writing it on paper kind of gave it some validity. Like, I was an avid reader, and I learned geeky things. I was into things that are stereotypically for boys, but I was like, I want to know. So I enjoyed doing like computer programming and stuff, and I was programming in Python when I was like 10. I always kind of feel a little bit bitter towards people that have encouraging parents, because I'm like, I could have been somebody. But I know like people say like, oh, it's never too late and stuff, and I'm like, well, it is when trauma's taken over. But slowly but surely I'm letting go of the trauma and letting more positive in. It's taken a very long time. My mum knows that I'm incredibly resentful to her for not being the protector, especially because it was her brother that had got me pregnant when I was 13, and she had walked in on him doing it. I've had conversations with her about it, and she says that that was the year that her dad died, so she doesn't really remember much going on. I've spoken to therapists about it. They do say that that's what they would see as an excuse. And having had my own child, I can't say that I could ever see how she could see it that way. I do think that some people weren't meant to be parents, and my parents are definitely 2 of them. It came first with my father. My first memory is 7, and that was with my dad. I think I found it scary because I have a sister that's only a year and a bit younger than me, and I always kind of felt like if I didn't do what he wanted, that he would move on to my sister. Now that I'm older, I know that that wouldn't have been the case. There was definitely a trauma bond with my bio dad for a long time. I couldn't see really until I got with my husband, who's a father, what a healthy father-daughter relationship was. And once I was able to see that, I was able to let go. But he put me through a lot through my childhood. He's waterboarded me, he's fractured my arm multiple times. I have a metal plate in my left arm that goes from like the bottom of my arm to the top of my arm, because my arm has been fractured and broken so many times. And he was the first person to start doing that. Like, it did happen in foster care as well, but he had done it 4 times before I hit double digits. I don't feel like at any point in my life was he anything other than toxic. My siblings, they would not agree with that, but what happened to me didn't happen to them. And I think that's why I try and do what I do with my page, to try and say, like, you can have the same family and have a different experience. So multiple times it would be waterboarding, like holding my head under the sink in the bathtub. There was so many times where I thought I was going to die and I didn't understand what I'd done wrong. And I remember crying out so many times, like, I'm sorry, just tell me what I did, I'm sorry. Because I'm like 7, 8 years old, and I'm like, what did I do? He would do extreme things. Like, after he had let someone take a turn on me, he would put me in the shower and like spray me with like really cold water and bleach and like scrub my skin and get me to scrub my skin and admit that I was dirty and not lovable and things like that. It was very confusing because I believed him. Like, he's my dad and I'm 7, 8 years old, and like I must have done something wrong. I believed that for such a long time, that I was a bad kid, that I deserved everything that was happening to me because I was bad. He's shot at me before, like he's told me to run and to like run diagonally if I'm lucky enough, it won't catch me. He did some very, very messed up, very scary things. And I just remember feeling really resentful that my sister was around, that my brother was around. And I'm like, why are you picking on me? And he would constantly tell me, it's like, I'm the eldest. He's got to break me so that he knows that I can take care of everybody when he's gone. I had no concept of what that was at like 8 years old. It was incredibly, incredibly confusing, and a lot of resentment that he had for females, I now understand is like a hurt people hurting people, which is a very confusing feeling because I was hurt and I could never do that to somebody. So it is very disappointing that he had children without healing, because he definitely needed healing. And I've said that to both my parents. I can't have a relationship with them because neither of them will have therapy. And in their eyes, they didn't do anything wrong. They weren't like the worst of the worst, and they weren't the best of the best. So they don't think that they did anything wrong. And I just can't agree with that. My dad more so, like, he was active. Like, I get upset at my mom because she was an enabler and she saw things that were happening and she failed to protect me. But my dad was the one, like, directly putting me through it, directly doing it, directly passing me off to his friends, using me to pay drug debts and stuff like that. And that was all before I was 10. And it completely warped my whole sense of self. And it has done my whole life. Like 12 years old, I got diagnosed with BPD and PTSD. My first interaction with like children's mental health. And they labeled me a child prostitute and a child escort instead of helping me. And the doctor that I saw, he started abusing me too in the therapy room. And he would get me to talk about what my uncle and my dad had been doing to me, and he would make me like pose for pictures, and he would take like Polaroids of me topless and stuff. And I was 13, and I tried telling people and nobody believed me. Everyone just thought like, oh, she's got a wild imagination, like she just makes up stories. Then I went into foster care and the same kind of thing happened. But I was so used to it then that like it didn't feel like trafficking, like things, everything like that. It didn't feel like it because it was just a continuation of what was happening at home. I didn't question anything. Like when things started happening in foster care and the stuff was going on with the BBC, like the BBC is a whole separate thing, but that started because of my dad. So I was like, I'll keep that separate. So it was normally a very simple command, and it was bordering like dog-like. He would just tell me to go get in the car, and I would just go get in the car, and I'd know that he'd come and take me somewhere. He'd come in with me. They would give him money. Like sometimes it was just straight up cash, or other times it was a parcel that had stuff in it. He would wait outside, and I knew every time he said get in the car, like I kind of felt like a gut-wrenching feeling of like, again, I thought the first time that it happened that like he realized that he messed up, because afterwards he cried and he told me that he was really sorry and that he shouldn't have done that. I was still his bunny girl, as he used to call me. And that was really confusing because I thought he really realized that like he shouldn't have done that and he was really sorry. And then it was only 2 days and he told me to get in the car again. And then it was like every 2 days. So it just became like a command, like a dog, like get out, like go get in the car. It was very confusing. But again, I was just so glad that it wasn't happening to my sister. And I'm glad that she won't ever understand that. She's only a year younger than me and she lives with him. She always has. And he's never, ever hurt her. So I'm glad, but I'm kind of jealous as well. My uncle would visit regularly. So my uncle is my mum's brother. There's not much of an age difference between me and my siblings, apart from the youngest ones. There's 10 years. They were very on again, off again, and they would use us as like pawns. Like, oh, if you can't see them, then I can't see them. If you can't do this, then I can't do this, and that kind of thing. It's very toxic. My dad would take me and my sister. My mum would take my brother, and then she got pregnant again with the twins. And it was just like a back and forth. So we were always between houses and stuff. And like, I would see my uncle, and my uncle would tell me to come into his dad's room. And it would happen at my granddad's house for the first time. My granddad died not knowing about it. And I think that was for the best, because it would have broke his heart, because he was a very old school Irish Catholic. And that was the reason that my nan begged me not to tell him, because he was already sick and it would have finished him. And I didn't really understand at 13, like when I was telling, this is after I had gotten pregnant, and I was petrified, like absolutely petrified. I went to the doctor's surgery with my mom, and I spoke to my nan and like had explained to her, like, it's your son that's doing this to me. And she cried, and she said that she was sorry and that he's just simple. And in that sense, like, they mean that, like, I know Americans don't like the word, but he's just mentally not there. That was the excuse that was used throughout my childhood, and it was almost like he got a free pass because he's simple. It didn't make sense to me because he might have been simple, but he's 6'4" and I'm a child, and he's nearly 70 years old. It was a lot to understand, but because my dad had already been doing it, I kind of just accepted that that was what happened in the family. Like, I'm the oldest, so I guess that's what has to go on. I spoke about it at school, and I really thought that the teachers would do something, and they didn't. They told me again, like, I had a wild imagination and that it couldn't possibly be true. I begged for help multiple times. When I was in foster care and I was being moved foster placements, I would tell the police, and then the police would do it too. People find that so shocking, and I'm like, but this is before body cams. Like, body cams have only become like a mandated thing in like the last 10-15 years, and I'm 32, so when I was growing up in foster care, they didn't have body cams on. It wasn't a mandatory thing. You didn't have to have the body cam on, and I would run away from foster care. They would find me and they would take their turn in the back seat and then take me home again, or to the foster home. Everything just became so intertwined that I don't even know if I'm still here. It's a lot when I think about it, and I think if someone else had gone through that, I'd be incredibly shocked. But for me, it was just what happened. I became pregnant at 13 with my uncle, and it might sound quite sick for a woman to say, but it's the one time I am incredibly thankful that I miscarried, because I had no idea what was going on. I had no idea what was happening to my body. I just remember I started throwing up, and I told my mom that I didn't feel well, and she was like, okay, I'll take you to the doctors. And because my mom was sat next to me and it was her brother, although I knew that she knew, I was scared of what would happen. Like, would I get taken away from my mom? Like, are my siblings going to get taken away if I told the doctor that it's her brother? And because I was already listed as a child escort and child prostitute at that point, they just wrote on the file that a chat was given to mother and daughter about STDs and the age of consent. That's kind of gut-wrenching to me in itself, because again, that's another mandatory reporter that saw a 13-year-old child that was pregnant and didn't say anything. I don't understand how so many people, like police officers, teachers, doctors, like, I tried to get help so many times, not just for myself, even like for my siblings, because when I was going to school and the smallest ones were at home, I was petrified. Very weird, but that is the only time out of the 5 times I've miscarried that I'm genuinely glad, because I don't know what that would have looked like for me to have my uncle's child. I do see it that way, because I don't think a lot of people understand, like, even that small bit that I felt at 13 of being pregnant was so overwhelming to me to feel as 13. Like, I've had pregnancies as an adult, and I'm like, this is a lot for my body. And like, then I remember feeling it at 13, and I'm like, that's crazy. The BBC studios is right next to where I grew up as a child, White City Estate, and the BBC would quite often go round to the local schools and, quite somewhat, I think, oddly, only specifically pick out girls and boys from years 4, 5, and 6, which is grade 4, 5, and 6 is the same in America. And they wouldn't pick like the younger ones or anything like that. Like, and they were very, very selective. They would come in and do interviews and stuff like that. And I watched the people that were getting picked, and then I kind of knew that I was going to get picked, and I was disappointed that I was going to get picked. And I don't know why I had that feeling. It just seemed incredibly odd, because I was watching how they were treating some of the children, and because of my experiences with my family then, and having been around a lot of adult males, I felt so uncomfortable with how they were treating the girls specifically. It's like almost they were looking over the boys and were just asking the girls a lot of questions and stuff like that. And we were being told that like we'd have our hair put in pigtails and things like that. And I found that incredibly bizarre. And my dad was the one that took me to the studio the first time, it was for a TV show called Blue Peter. I felt excited at first, and then I felt concerned because my sister was coming with me. I kind of had an inkling that what was going to happen was bad. I think that was because my dad was excited and he was talking about money and how much money he would make and like what he'd be able to do with it and stuff like that, because of what he had done to me before, dropping me off at houses and things like that. I felt like everything was doing 2 and 2, and at that age I shouldn't have been able to figure out that it was 4. But he was the one that initially started taking me to the studio, and then my sister would come along as well. And the first time I went to the studio, it wasn't traumatic. It was just being shown around and that kind of thing. The second time, I was taken to a green room and there was only one person in there, and the door closed behind me, and it was a TV presenter from one of the children's shows, and he's in a wheelchair and he was just naked from like bottom down, and he had an erection. And at that point, like, I'm in year 5 in school, and if it hadn't been for what had been happening with my family, I wouldn't have any idea. I'm annoyed that I knew what was going on, that I knew what was expected of me. And I just remember feeling scared again for my sister, because my sister was there and I didn't know if she was with my dad or if she had been put into another room like me. So I wanted to get it over with quickly. When I was like pulled down to his level and made to give him oral, I just wanted it to be over with quickly so that I could find my sister. And when I did find my sister, she was okay. She hadn't been taken into one of the rooms, and I just had tears streaming down my face. And my dad slapped me and told me that I needed to get it together because nobody could see that, because then they would think that it was rape. And as an adult, I'm like, but that was like, you might have consented to me doing that, but I didn't. And that's how it carried on after that. He would be the one to put me in harm's way and put me in these green rooms and stuff. I just wish that I was an innocent kid, that I didn't know what was going on, that I screamed or like did something, because I know I was a child, so I know that like I'm not to blame, but I still feel like I didn't scream, I didn't do anything like that, because it was just a fear of like, well, I know what happens with my dad and my uncle and other people if I scream and fight back. Like, they've knocked out teeth before, and I just had that in my head, like instilled, just like every single time I was put into the room, I was like, just get it over with. As long as I knew that it wasn't happening to my sister, I was fine. Just over 6 years. I started being taken to the studio when I was 7. So the trafficking within my family, that was initiated by my family, started when I was 7, when I started being taken to the studios, and they stopped being the ones to benefit from it when I was 13, when I went into foster care. And then the trafficking carried on in foster care because of me being labelled a child prostitute and a child escort, and that was at the top of my file. It still is at the top of my medical file. I put myself into foster care on a voluntary. 13, after everything that happened with my uncle and my mum let him back in the house, stuff was going on at school, and there was a teacher that was doing the same stuff as my uncle, and I was very confused. And so I got found by 2 firemen, and they had thought that I was much older than I was because I was 6 foot, and they had assumed that it was like opiates and stuff like that. So they called the ambulance. And then when I stood up and they saw that I was in school uniform, I saw the fireman cry and walk away, and I heard him talking and being like, that could have been my kid. And that stayed with me because I felt guilty that I made someone else feel like that, when all I wanted to do was to make everything stop. And nobody was listening to me. Not like I had told people, like, literally the words, like, I'm being hurt at home, and nobody was listening to me. So I was like, if I do this, will somebody listen to me? Like, if I actually hurt myself and show people that I'm hurting, will they listen to me? Because I know you can't see what goes on inside my head, but it's hurting. I had put myself into foster care, and I left the hospital into my first foster placement, and I was with them for about 6 months. My mum begged me to come home because she couldn't cope with the kids, and I was stupid and the third parent. So I came out of getting better and went back to be with my mum, and social services said, we'll keep this foster placement open for 4 weeks in case anything breaks down. And my mum waited the day after it broke down, and she laughed in my face and said, now you can't go back to your mum and dad, because she had gotten jealous that I called the foster carers mum and dad, and that was noted by all of the professionals as to showing how estranged I was from my own family that within a week I'm calling strangers mum and dad and my brothers. And she hated that because it made her look like a bad mum. Yeah, I did the same I don't know, because nothing bad had happened to me in foster care at that point, so I didn't have a bad view of foster care yet. So I pretty much did the same thing again, but I did it at school. At school, and they called the ambulance, and I made sure to be very vocal in front of as many people as I could, telling them I'm being raped, like, can you please help me? I think a lot of people noted it down, but nothing came of it. It was mentioned at a conference, and then I got put back into the foster care system, but they had changed it from how it works down here. We have local authority and agency foster care, and if you're lucky enough to be with agency, you'll probably have an okay experience. If you're unfortunate enough to be placed with local authority, then my experience is a very common one in the UK, because you're just a number and it doesn't matter. And I regretted going into foster care for stability because I didn't get it. It's like all of the people that I got put to, they saw the top of my file, and the dads just saw it as an advantage to like do what they wanted to do. And it was like it was put on display that it was going to be okay to do that to me because I'm used to it. And every time I spoke up about it, my bags would just be packed into a black bag, like a trash bag, and I'd be told as soon as I got home from school, like, you're moving, and it would just carry on. Like 95%, I would say 95% of the foster placements I had were abusive. Some of them would let the siblings in the house, like their actual children, come in and do what they wanted to do to me as well. I don't get mad at myself for not fighting back because I was a kid. It feels weird because I am mad at myself for not fighting back, but I'm not mad at myself because I was a child. And it's a very like paradoxical almost feeling, like, I don't know how to describe it. Like, I'm mad at myself, but I'm not, because I was a child. But I just feel like a lot of normal people would have known that that wasn't normal, and maybe they would have gotten help sooner. But I thought that's what I had to do. I've never felt like I had autonomy over my body until recently. When I turned 18, it didn't feel real. It felt like, okay, well, you're not going to be in foster care anymore, but now you're homeless. So here you go. And they just kind of drop you like a potato, like a hot potato. Like, here you go, figure it out. So I spent a year like on the streets and in a B&B and in hostels and stuff. But I actually see myself as being very fortunate, as weird as it sounds, because I'm a woman and I got housed very, very quickly. So the first year that I was homeless, I thought I was going to be homeless for a long time. Then I turned 18 and I got given my first flat. I stayed in my flat from 18 until literally last year. I try and take positives from pretty much everything that I've been through, and I write a lot of survivor poetry on my channel and stuff, and I try and share some of my experiences to let other people know that they're not alone. Because the biggest thing that I have always felt in my whole life is like, nobody can feel this way because there's no way that somebody else has lived this. And I find that like really, really cathartic, because I've always had that like, where are my people? Where are you? Like, I need to belong to some kind of community. And now I feel like I belong to the healing community, where I'm helping other people be like, you're not alone. Like, I know it sounds weird, but like, that happened to me too. It's very different now than how it used to be. And I'm glad, because more voices are being heard. And the more of us that speak up as survivors, the less chance there is that we'll be silenced. That's what I try and do. And I could never, ever repair the relationship with my dad. That's just gone, because I will never forgive him for what he did to me. Not now that I've had a child myself. Before, I was very confused with the trauma bond and like I didn't really understand. But having had a child myself and know that I would go to the ends of the earth, like, it's such a different feeling. I could never forgive. My mum, I feel I have forgiven her a lot. I will never fully forgive her because it was her brother and she saw what was happening and she should have been able to stop it. And even with my dad, she had opportunities to leave him. I'm a very strong-willed woman, so when I found myself in the same kind of domestic violence situation before with my daughter's father, I was adamant as soon as I realized that I'd repeated the loop kind of thing and gone for someone like my dad, immediate disconnection. And that was just such the wake-up call for me. Like, I am not going to allow this for my daughter. And I've spoken to a lot of parents about looking out for the signs of trafficking and things like that. Like, it's definitely different now than when I first started speaking about it, because there's so much more online presence with like social media, and you cannot watch your kids. Like, you can be a hover mum, but you can't watch your kids 24/7. And there are definite dangerous adults on children's platforms that will do dangerous things. I think there needs to be more awareness on things like that, because I know a lot of parents would find that incredibly useful.